Okay. All right, my folks are depicted here in this picture. My dad, myself, and my mother. This picture here had nothing to do with the three of them, but this is a picture of my dad when he was courting my mother. This is a picture of the three generations, my grandfather, myself, and my father. That was taken when I was junior in high school. And this is a picture of my mother's family. I'll get this one up. This one out of the way here. My mother had two brothers and a sister. This is her oldest brother, Herman, her youngest brother, Ed, her sister, Edna, and her mother and father.
Okay.
I don't know when that was taken, but that, of course, it was taken before any of the children were married. Her oldest brother, Herman, died of tuberculosis when he was a relatively young man.
And he's the father of our...
He fathered three daughters.
They live in Two Rivers.
And, yeah.
Okay.
They lived in Two Rivers, Wisconsin. This, we don't really know who that is. We think that is a baby picture of, no, I don't know.
Let me see it, Earl.
Is this him?
Oh, I don't know
Yeah.
either.
Okay.
This is a picture of my father's family. Not really the whole family. He's missing in it.
Uh-huh.
But that's his grandfather, his grandmother, and, well, let's see,
Their son
that'd
and
be
daughter.
my grandfather, and I don't know who that is.
So that's his parents?
His grandparents.
This guy, though?
Yeah,
That's his parents?
Point it out again.
These two? Well, him.
it,
That's your grandfather, right?
right. And this could be my grandfather too, because this looks very much like my grandmother.
Oh, okay.
But I didn't ever know him when he was that heavy.
Oh, okay, so might have been just him when he was younger.
And so I think this is my father,
Mm-hmm.
and this is his sister.
Right.
Okay.
You're pretty bad where it was, Michael.
Okay.
The chair,
Well, this
the chair keeps you...
This is my mother, your grandmother,
Right.
and
Grandpa?
Yeah, great-grandmother.
yeah,
Like-
Yeah, it's my great-grandmother.
and your great-grandfather. My father lived to be 60 years old. He was a pretty young man when he died. And she lived to be 91.
What did he die from?
Heart attack.
Oh, okay.
When he was a boy, he had rheumatic fever, which invariably weakens the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And that was probably the reason he died an early death. I mean, he died early.
Mm-hmm.
And this picture here is where my father was born. That Brown's Corners, it was called. It's outside of Manitowoc, Wisconsin. The building has been torn down. The last time we were back there, it wasn't there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a picture of my father's brother, Edwin, who as a boy rigged up his cart so his sheep, I think it's a sheep, not a
Mhm.
goat,
Mm-hmm.
was able to pull it.
Mm.
And,
Put the one on the wall there.
oh, that picture over there on the wall is me. Taken out in the country where we were visiting some relatives of ours when I was about, what?
You were going like that.
Oh, well, I don't know what you're trying to do.
Hmm.
When I was probably about 3 years old. Now the backs of these pictures have got names on as to who they are.
Okay.
Or is the light reflected on them?
No, that's fine.
Well, this is kind of a family picture of my mother's side of the family. It was taken at a birthday celebration for my Aunt Edna, and we were all out to this eating place for her, celebrating her birthday. And this is my Uncle Ed and Aunt Mame. Uncle Ed, of course, being my mother's brother.
Mm-hmm.
And this is Uncle Herman's wife, Carrie. Uncle Herman, that's the older brother that died early, and I think I was in college when he died.
Okay.
And that's
his widow at that point?
This is his widow.
Okay.
This is Grace, her daughter,
Okay.
and
Her husband's standing right above. Wilbur.
yeah, this is her husband up here. This is Walter Brown, no relation,
Oh, yeah.
but a friend of Edna's. The two of them went together for many years but never married.
Well, he owned the brown garage.
And this is Lila, who is Carrie's daughter, and her husband, and their baby. And this is your grandma
Mm-hmm.
and myself.
Did Edna ever marry?
No.
Okay.
And this is John. And incidentally, my mother's family name was Schur, S-C-H-U-R-R.
Mm-hmm.
This is John, who is her son, their son. And here we have your father, Roger,
Mm-hmm.
his brother, Brownie,
Wayne Lipke.
Wayne.
Wayne Lipke. Wayne is this lady's and his son,
Mm-hmm.
and Wayne's brother and his sister.
This was during the 40s then that this was taken? Or
Early
close to
50s.
Early 50s?
Early 50s.
Maybe it's on the...
Hey, these guys got some good colors and
I've got nothing on the back here. I thought I had it all on there.
kids do.
Yeah, that would have to have been in the 50s sometime.
So John's mother and father were Uncle Ed and Aunt Mame.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Let's see.
This is a picture of Brownie when he was in the Navy. And this is a group of our church buddies who we used to camp with on occasion when we had a trailer, which is in the background. And this is a modern family picture of
When Aunt Edna was out here to
when,
visit.
yes, when Aunt Edna was out here to visit. My mother had moved out here by that time. And that's your grandma, myself, Ronnie, Roger, and your mother.
Yep.
Before they, of course, before they were married.
Yeah, July of 62. So what year were you married?
June of 62. That was right after we
That's
were
right
married.
after you got married then.
Yeah, we were married a month there.
Really? You know that?
Well, I don't know when I got married.
Well, I
Yeah,
know,
that
but you
picture
don't
is
know whether
faded.
that- picture was taken then, right?
Well, Daddy said it was July of '62.
Oh, he did.
That's what it says on
Says.
it.
Oh, this is a reunion picture.
My first reunion picture.
Hmm.
That's a reunion picture.
No, this is Alice's class.
There, Daddy, stand back again.
Say that one again.
What?
Who are those three in the front there?
Here?
Point out, Mom.
This is Mother.
In the white.
Mm-hmm.
And
This
Kate,
is Kate.
and it
Yeah.
doesn't matter who the others are.
Kate Schwegler.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anybody else.
Beatty's not in there?
No, she
No.
never did come back for the reflection.
Well, come on this side.
Yeah, I'll
In
get up.
'76, when everybody was at our house one time.
Except
Uh,
Scott.
Scott's there.
This
Oh,
guy
Scott's
wasn't
there.
born then yet.
No, Scott's there. That's Scott. That's Adam.
That's Adam.
Yeah.
This is Brownie's children are Scott,
Todd.
Todd, and Adam. When this picture was taken, he wasn't born
He was
yet.
still in.
She's
Pregnant.
At the time.
pregnant.
Yeah, okay.
And Brownie and Grandma and myself,
Mhm.
Jenny, and I don't know who this is.
Yeah, that's me.
Oh, okay. And your dad and your mother. Your dad was a little bit thinner in that picture.
Mm-hmm. Who are these people?
That's your,
Uncle Carl and Rosalie.
Is that really?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Years ago, of course.
And
Miriam and
Miriam and Paul.
Huh. That's funny. I wouldn't have recognized Carl and Rosalie.
A few years ago.
I don't think I ever saw the pictures.
Those is our family picture.
Christmas of '61.
And that's our wedding announcement. See, we got married and then we told everybody. We
Is that right?
Didn't tell them
Uh-huh.
before.
You guys have a small wedding?
Yeah.
As small as you can get.
Families, our respective families were.
There, that was it.
Well, I was working in Indiana with the Forest Service then, and I had a limited amount of time off.
Mm-hmm.
So I came home, got married, and left. In fact, we left the afternoon of our wedding.
We got married on Monday at 12 o'clock, noon.
Oh, really?
Wash day.
Huh.
That was something, and then we drove from Manitowoc to Chicago that afternoon yet. In my pretty new 1935 Dodge Coupe, one seat,
Mm-hmm.
which they don't make anymore. Well, there's no point in telling you where that is, because you know.
Yeah.
And this is a choir that Grandma sang in at our church. And outside of that, there's
Is that one?
this one.
Yeah.
Well, when I went back to Manitowoc from Indiana because of the war, I was superintendent of a CCC camp at that time. Well, when the war started, the camps began to full, like,
Because kids were going to the army.
yeah, the boys that were in the camps actually were inducted into the Army.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had no job. So I came back to Manitowoc with your dad, who was a baby then, in 42. He was born in 40. And so they could be near somebody who loved them in case I would be called to war.
Mm-hmm.
Well, instead of that, I went to work, instead of going to war, I went to work for the shipbuilding company in Manitowoc. And worked for all during the war, and they were building submarines at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an interesting experience. I'd been graduated as a forester with a lot of natural science, and here I am in an engineering environment. But
Yeah.
fortunately, before I transferred to forestry,
Oh, don't do that with your
I
hand.
had decided to be an engineer. That's what I went to school for at the University of Wisconsin. But after spending 2 years in engineering, I looked at the employment possibilities, and engineers were a dime a dozen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I couldn't afford not to be working, so I decided to change my major from engineering to forestry, which had a much better opportunity in that profession. And but I couldn't get it at Wisconsin, so I had to transfer it to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And so that engineering background, what little I had in 2 years, was very helpful when I went to work at the shipbuilding company.
Mm.
So after, in about 1940, I don't remember when this was taken,
Mm-hmm.
but the war was over. We had been cut back in our manufacture of submarines. And there'd been a hole put on after a certain hull was in the water. And I was thinking about going back to the Forest Service. And there was a regional office in Milwaukee, and I was making tentative plans to go down there and find out what they might have in store for me. But before I could do that, I was interviewed by somebody at the shipbuilding company who I had never known while I was working there. And they invited me to become a member of a new division that they were starting. And this is a picture of the 6 of us who started the new division.
Mm.
I don't know if these names they won't mean anything to you.
Mm-hmm.
But this was the manager, a fellow by the name of Diedrichs.
Mm-hmm.
This is myself. This is a good friend of ours, Sherm Granger, who was sort of a time study expert.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a mechanic, a good mechanic. And this is an artist who ended up designing some of our products that we made at the new division. And this is an administrative type.
What was the division to do?
Well, during the war, they had what they called a post-war planning department. And they had researched and surveyed products that would be in demand after the war.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was a combination freezer and refrigerator that nobody had ever made them yet.
Oh, really?
So we built, that was our first basic product after the war. We built what we call a 2-zone. And I ran across an old advertising gimmick. What did I do with it? Yeah.
And then they named the upright freezer refrigerated by the...
This is the first, you can have it. This is the first.
Hold it up so I can see it.
Oh, okay. So this may be your first peek at the new Manitowoc 2-zone.
with the catchy name Manitowoc.
For a better look, we'd be happy to have you drop in for refreshments and inspect this new refrigerator-freezer combination.
We had that at
This is open house.
distributor meeting.
So prior to this, people, did they have refrigerators separate from freezers, or
Yeah.
They had boxes, big boxes.
ice boxes?
Freezers.
Oh, okay. So
Chest,
they kind of opened
like
it
a
from the top?
we call them chest type freezers, the old ones.
Like a cedar chest, sort of.
Yeah, well,
Only bigger.
so we were,
That's far away, isn't it?
Okay, here we have pictures of my brother and I as babies to start out with. And then that's high school graduation for me. His baby picture. High school graduation for him. And then down lower there is his wedding. with his bride, Kathy. And then down here is Joyce and I in our wedding.
In Riverside yet.
But does anybody go to it?
Well, I would think so.
Okay,
know.
we're on now.
They wouldn't run
We're on?
anything then.
Okay, we're on the air.
Okay.
So, tell us what you remember from your childhood.
Tell us what?
Memories of our childhood.
What years were you born?
1913.
Both of us were born in 1913. Do you want to tell them about your interesting childhood?
Where were you born and raised, Mom?
Two Rivers, Wisconsin.
How big of a family did you have?
Two brothers. Actually, my mother had two babies before Carl was born, but they both were such huge babies that they didn't survive birth.
Oh, really?
So Carl's your oldest brother?
Yeah.
Living brother.
What else you want to know?
And you had another brother, John.
Yeah.
What do you remember doing as a child?
As a child, not too much. The one thing that stands out is we had just a little garden off the back porch, and I remember as a little girl walking through it with my bare feet, and I got stung on a bee. And oh, that was terrible. I cried and I cried. My mother put something on it, I don't know what. But that was an experience was traumatic.
Do you remember any winters? Doing anything in the winter in the snow?
Oh yeah, we go ice skating all the time.
On the river?
Huh?
On the river?
Yeah, on the river.
Is it a river or a lake?
Well, there's a river that runs
Two
through
rivers?
the river.
Rivers.
And their house
And
was only a
the
couple...
river freezes over and you can ice skate on it? Wow.
They were only about a block and a half from the river, weren't you?
Nice.
How wide's the river there?
Oh, probably a couple hundred feet. In addition to skating on the river, they ice boated on the river. That was something. I mean,
So we have a sail?
an ice boat.
Yeah, they have sailors.
An ice boat was made almost like a cross. There was a fore and aft beam that they put a seat on, and a cross beam that had a runner on each end, and there was a runner on the back and in the front. And you would, on a good windy day, and the sail would take you at speeds of close to 60 miles an hour.
Wow.
Did you ever ride one?
Yeah,
I never had that chance.
yeah. It was a very interesting experience. In fact,
Faster than most cars of that day.
oh yeah, oh yeah.
Also on the river there, we had a ski, whatever you call it.
Jump.
Yeah. Guys would ski down and jump off, from a height. That was fun watching.
What kinds of modern day conveniences didn't you guys have?
Didn't have?
Yeah.
Well, my folks, we didn't have any refrigerator.
How do you live without a refrigerator?
Well, they had.
Uh,
Did you even have what they called an ice box?
No. I can remember, like in the colder days, my mother used to open the window a little bit and set the stuff. And on the hot days, I remember she'd draw some cold water in a pan and put the butter in there to keep it from melting.
See, one of the things that we had was storm windows. In the fall, we would put another window on. Wherever there was a window, we put one just like that up from the outside.
Cold out.
And her reference to opening the window and putting something in it would be between the storm window and
That would keep it
the
cool.
inner window, which acted as a refrigerator.
Huh. So,
About a
I'm just trying to think of how you do this. Then you get groceries or whatever, food, and you just have to eat it soon?
Like, how did you store meat, or?
I don't think I paid that much
You
attention.
didn't, you went to the butcher shop to get your meat.
So it was all, you'd have to have it fresh?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Many trips I walked to the butcher shop.
What about school? How big of a school did you go to? Grammar school?
Well, it was the only school we had.
Well, I mean, each grade have their own room and everything?
Yeah.
Did you walk to school?
Yeah. I
How far
went
away?
as far as second grade, and then third grade, they sent me up to our new school on the north end of town. I can remember Kate and I walking all ours. I was from the old school to the new school.
No, was that new school, was that the
High
school
The
that I
high
went
school
to
that's-
kindergarten
The high
in?
school.
Yeah, we had all grades there too.
Yeah, I was raised in the same, for several years, in the same house that Mom grew up in Two Rivers.
And you
Really?
went to the same school too.
Right, and in kindergarten, when I started school, I went to the same school, same high school she graduated from. That school was kind of unique. It had a high school plus kindergarten in the same building.
So now the house stayed in the family then?
Well, the students in Two Rivers were exceptional. They went from kindergarten to freshman to high school.
Wow, that's one effective kindergarten program, huh? So how is it that you guys were living in the same house?
Yeah, the house stayed in the family while Mom and Dad lived in Indiana before the war.
My mother was still living there,
Yeah.
and John.
Her mother lived there with John.
Okay, and then,
Then when she died, we rented it out until we decided we wanted to move in there
Yeah, we were living in Manitowoc at that time
during the war.
during the war in some war housing that was built in Manitowoc to house the increase in employment that was taking place at the shipbuilding company.
Mm-hmm.
And we lived in one of these, like I say,
duplex, like,
P10R or something.
P10R was
P10R was
the
the number
address
of
of
it.
it.
And Roger was born there.
It was an interesting house. It had a living room and 2 bedrooms and a kitchen.
You mean
No, I
Brownie,
wasn't- I wasn't.
Brownie was born there?
No,
No.
I mean Roger.
Roger was born in Indiana.
Oh, well, you were a little kid. Yeah,
was a
Brownie,
little-
you're right. But you were a little kid running around. I could see you running
Brown-
around and you put...
Brownie
on
was
your
born when we
bicycle.
lived there, though.
Huh?
Brownie was born when we lived there, right?
Yeah.
So you want to tell us how the two of you met?
No,
Well,
wait,
you
wait,
do
wait,
that.
wait,
Oh,
wait,
we're
before
two-
we do that, what about Grandpa's
Well,
cousin?
that was kind of interesting also. During the summertime when I was at the University of Wisconsin, during the summertime I came home to Manitowoc, of course, and Manitowoc was only 7 miles from Two Rivers where Alice lived. But Two Rivers had more interest in their young people than Manitowoc did, and as a result they had a community house which was donated by one of the Hamilton people who had made a good fortune building furniture in Two Rivers. Well, anyway, at this community house, they would have a dance every Friday night that was open to anybody that could pay the 50 cents or whatever it was that we had. I don't remember if they ever had any.
I don't think they had admission.
Well, anyway, when I came back between my freshman and sophomore year at the university, when I came back in the summertime, one of my friends that I'd gone to high school with inveigled me to go down to Two Rivers to one of these dances that they had at the community house. And I did, and we went there for several weeks, and I wasn't having any fun because I didn't know anybody that was there, and so on this particular Wednesday, I guess it was, when Bill called me up and said, "You want to go to the community house again? I said, I don't think so. Well, he kept pulling my leg, and I said, well, okay, I'll go once more. But if I don't have a good time, that's it, we're through. So we went this once more, and I walked into the lobby area of this building, and there was dear Alice standing and talking to about 3 or 4 boys around her.
I have to explain that. There were girls too, because I had a blouse on that I had made, and it was a pattern that Katharine Hepburn had worn in the movie.
And you were showing it off?
And I was showing it off.
No.
Anyway, that's when I came and I saw her, and I said, I got to dance with that girl. Well, I don't know why I didn't ask her to dance. I guess it was because I didn't have enough nerve for a while. But anyway, it was getting late, and the dance quit at
1 o'clock, I think it went.
1 or 12 or whatever it was.
Whatever.
So I got up enough courage to ask her if I could have a dance, and she said, you can have the 3rd one. I mean, after a little conversation, she said, you can have the 3rd one. Well, there only were 2 more.
Oh.
So I didn't get to dance with her that night. But you can rest assured I was there bright and early the next Friday because I had to get that dance in. And that's how we met. We met on a dance floor. And we started going together, and then all during my sophomore year at university, we would write to each other 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And
We each wrote.
we each wrote.
So is the attraction mutual from day one? Was the attraction mutual from the start?
Apparently so. Is
I
that
really don't know.
You don't know, okay. He knows he was very interested.
I was pushing it, right?
I think so.
Well, it paid off.
I did one of the things that attracted me. He drove his daddy's car, and it was a real nice one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So you
But
really
it
haven't
made an
changed.
impression.
Yeah, it was a great car. It was a Dodge, and it had wood spoke
Yellow
wheels, and the spokes were painted yellow, and the car was black. So,
Did your families have cars when you grew up?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
My folks had the Maxwell, all the jokes about the Maxwells. And then they had a Buick after that.
Jack Benny had a lot of jokes about the Maxwell.
Yeah.
There were lots of different cars in those days, the different makes. Everybody and their brother who had worked for Henry Ford after a while branched off and built a car of their own. And
I learned to drive the Buick by driving in and back out of the garage and onto the driveway. I go back and forth.
You gotta explain something. When I was a teenager learning how to drive, I remember one time washing the car or something, and I backed it up and down the driveway, I bet you 50 times that day. And I was really surprised that somebody didn't come out and say, Roger, stop that. But since you learned how to do it that way, that's probably why you didn't stop
They
me.
were lucky I didn't go through the other end of the garage when I
her
was
experience, her experience influenced the gene that you inherited, huh?
Yeah.
Well, at least it influenced her behavior to allow me to do that, because she did it when she was a kid.
Maybe I didn't even know you were doing it. I don't know.
Now, you guys were, how old when the Depression hit?
When did the Depression hit?
33. 10 years old.
10 years old?
No, 20.
No, 20.
20. 20. 33, we were born in 13.
How do you remember that affecting your life?
Well, I knew then that I would never go beyond high school. I knew that.
Because no money for college?
Carl went, but Carl was a different person than I was. He was what should I say?
More aggressive?
Aggressive, yeah, and independent, and of course he worked a lot. And he worked in the summer, going through the next year.
Tell them what you
And my
thought.
mother told John and me, neither one of you are going to go to college, so that just, you know.
No, that was because she couldn't afford to
Well,
send.
my father had died in the meantime, and, no, we couldn't
Mhm.
afford that.
Did she pay for Carl's college?
Well, yes, some, but he paid for a lot of it too.
According to Carl, he paid her back too.
Yeah, oh yeah. And I went to work,
Uh-huh.
and for a while there, I was the only one in the family working. Even Carl wasn't, during vacation. I earned $45 a month, and I used to give my mother 15 of that.
Mhm.
And by the time I quit, and I worked there, I think, 3 years, I was making $60 a month. That sounds like peanuts, Mom.
Well, in those days, things didn't cost as much. I can remember that my father, who was an accountant by profession, worked for the aluminum goods manufacturing company in Manitowoc, who made pots and pans out of aluminum. He had a pretty good job as an accountant there, but I can remember him telling about getting his pay cut during the Depression 3 different times. And after the things got to some degree of normalcy, he never got those cuts
Reimbursed.
Reinstated.
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 For a long time. He had to work for less money than he did before the Depression. So we didn't experience, I didn't experience anything about the Depression except what I read in the paper. And of course, in those years during the Depression, we had this great dust bowl that in the Oklahoma and Kansas and Nebraska, we had a drought like we're having now there, and it was terrible. It lasted several years. And a lot of people from there migrated to California.
Mm.
And there were movies made about that in that time.
Do you remember anything from your childhood, Dad?
Yeah, I can remember the first day I went to school was in kindergarten, and my mother and this friend of mine who went to high school with me, graduated, also went to school the first day of school in probably around 1917 or 18 we went to school. And his mother and my mother and he and I walked to school, and that was probably about 6 blocks. And during the winter time in Manitowoc, we got a reasonable amount of snow, and it would stay for several weeks, depending on how much we got. Sometimes the initial snow would stay all winter. But people had to shovel the sidewalks. That was a must, because if you didn't shovel the sidewalk, the city crews would do it, and they would attach the cost of shoveling to your tax bill.
Mm-hmm.
And the city employees didn't work too cheap in those days, so it was better. You were better off shoveling your own sidewalk.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that snow would mound up alongside the sidewalk, and I can remember as kids we used to have a path that would run along the top of those mounds.
Really?
Do you remember that?
Oh, sure. You didn't walk on the sidewalk, you walked on top of the
That was kind of fun. And of course, I can't remember anything about school itself, except going to that school. I can see the school, but inside the school, I can't remember anything about that.
Do you remember the kinds of games you guys used to play?
Yeah, we would play ice hockey in the wintertime. In the summertime, we'd play baseball, and not much else. Most of us in the summertime, after we got old enough and big enough, would cut lawns or wash cars or do something like that in the neighborhood.
Uh-huh.
When you were, how old were you when you started driving an automobile?
As old as I had to be to get a permit. We didn't have the equivalent of a DMV in those days. You had to have a driver's license, which was given to you by the state. But you had to be, at least, as I recall, you had to be 16 years of age, unless you were a farm boy and had to drive a farm car or truck. Then I guess you could be 14 before you got a license that made you real proud of the fact that you could drive a car.
Mm-hmm.
I started driving actually when I was 12. We had a Buick at that time, a so-called touring car. You call it a ragtop now, but it was a 5 or 6 passenger car.
A ragtop, is that a convertible or?
No. Well, yeah, the top would come down, but nobody ever put it down.
Okay.
Because it would rain every other day, so you'd have to put it back up again.
But it had a canvas top?
Yeah, it was a fabric top of some type. And my dad had that for about 2 years. That was in 1923 when he got his first automobile. See, then I was 10 years old. And then when he had it another 2 years, I started driving. When I was 12.
Did you have a license or?
No.
Okay.
You could drive, if you were with your parents, you could drive before you had to have a license. And there wasn't any traffic. It's amazing when I think back the little traffic we had to contend with.
That's because there were a few people that had cars?
People couldn't afford to have cars. A lot of them couldn't, and they were novelty. A car was a novelty.
Now, your father was an accountant, you said?
Mm-hmm.
So did you grow up in a upper middle class home, or?
No, he grew up at Brown's Corners, which is...
No, I'm asking you about your family, though. Were you guys, well, you had an automobile. Was that kind of an indication that you had more money?
Well, that was kind of a status symbol of some sort.
Particularly.
Sure. There were lots of people that didn't have automobiles. There were more people that didn't have than had them.
What did you have to do to get your driver? You told me one time about getting your driver's license, what you had to do before you were allowed to drive.
I never had a driver's license when I was young.
I don't recall, Roger.
No, you were telling me you had to go to the judge?
Don't know that.
Probably some city official. I don't know if it was a judge. Somebody had been given the job of issuing driving permits or whatever they were called. I don't think they were called licenses even.
I remember one time you told me that he only asked you some questions from the Bible.
Doesn't ring a bell.
No? Okay.
I remember you saying that too, but...
Well, you see, we at this stage of life, our memories are still excellent, but very short.
Yeah, well...
Tell us about how your family came to America. I think that's kind of interesting about your ancestors.
Well, right now our name is spelled P-R-O-W-N.
Yeah.
My great-grandfather came from Germany, and he spelled the name B-R-A-U-N, which is a German spelling. But his father was in the service of the Kaiser of Germany. That was the equal to the king of a country. And what my grandfather told me was that when he was about 14 years of age, he decided he wasn't going to work for the Kaiser. So he ran away from home, because in those days, if you were born into a situation, you stayed in that situation. Well, he didn't like it. He wanted to come to America. So he joined the German merchant marine. And this was in the days when they didn't have any motor vessels yet, any powered vessels. It was all wind sailing days. And his ship never came to America. So one time when his ship docked in England, he jumped ship, or he left the ship, and he stowed aboard a British merchantman.
Was being in the merchant marine like being in the military, or?
I don't know. I doubt it. I think it was like a profession. You became a sailor.
Okay.
On a commercial sailing ship,
Yeah,
not a military
commercial
ship.
sailor.
Okay.
Who told you this
My-
story, which I've heard umpteen times?
My grandfather.
So what year would this have been, do you think?
I haven't the foggiest right now.
The late 1800s or?
Yeah, it would have to have been in the middle 1800s even, somewhere in there. Because his ship finally is sailing on this British ship. He finally got to America, and he told of one experience that my grandfather told me of one experience that his father had when he was a sailor on it. They were going through some waters near the Indian Ocean, and some natives paddled out in war canoes to intercept the ship and probably loot it or do what they could.
Mm-hmm.
And they were shipping carpet tacks. They had kegs of carpet tacks. So the captain of the ship told them to break out the kegs of carpet tacks and strew them on the deck.
Oh, man.
And these natives came over the side of the ship and they hit the carpet tacks with their bare feet, and they bounced right back off again. They had never experienced anything like that. So whether that is fact or fantasy, I don't know. But well, I just recalled it. See that
Or made it up?
No.
Now, the guy that was a sailor was your grandfather, or your grandfather's father?
My great-grandfather.
Okay. So he's the father of the guy the oldest guy we saw in the picture.
That experienced what I'm telling about?
Yeah.
Yeah. He was the father of my grandfather, which is the oldest guy you saw in the picture. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the next thing we know about him, and the next thing my grandfather knew about him, was that he owned a wind sailing vessel on the Great Lakes. He was master of the schooner. And that's interesting because what we didn't know is when he came to America, did he come through the New York gatehead or the Boston gatehead? It was one of the two, and my grandfather couldn't remember which. When I worked during the war for the Manitowoc Shipbuilding Company, we had a reasonable amount of sabotage on the submarine program. Not major, but minor. And the FBI came in to investigate some of this, and I was interviewed by one of the FBI men one afternoon, and he told me that my great-grandfather had come through the Boston gatehead. He had a little dossier on me. I don't know how he got it, probably from college or something. And I smiled and I said, I'm glad to hear you say that, because we often wondered about that. Do you know how he got this schooner on the Great Lakes? He didn't know anything about that. So I I mean, his knowledge was limited. But then, after, I don't know how many years he sailed on the lakes with the schooner, it couldn't have been too many, because he apparently sold the schooner and settled down in what is near Manitowoc, Wisconsin, on the shore of the lakes. And he became, he couldn't work in the sailor trade there because there just wasn't any work like that, so he learned to be a butcher.
Mm-hmm.
Now he was in his 30s at this time. And there were a lot of immigrants that came in from Europe that settled in our part of the country, and a lot of them came over from Germany. So he met a German girl who was half as old as he was and married her. And my grandfather was the first child of this marriage.
So she would have been a teenager.
Yeah, she was, I guess,
15.
18 or 19 when he married her.
Okay.
And
Was it him who changed the spelling of our name?
yeah, when he joined, when he joined a German, when he stowed aboard the British merchantman, he was smart enough to figure out that if he had an English name, they probably wouldn't do anything to him. So he changed it to B-R-O-W-N, and he had an E on the end of it. He became really English.
Oh, really?
And when my grandfather dropped the E off the name.
When you say he stowed aboard, does that mean he was working for them, or?
Yeah, they put him to work. When you were a stowaway, they didn't call the policemen over and arrest you. They didn't have anything like that. So they just put you to work. And he having had sailing experience, he probably did all right.
But it does mean he hid himself on board until they left port?
Yeah, I don't know. He stowed away on the ship and came out after they started to sail, and they put him to work.
So
Well, anyway,
your grandfather then changed the name to Brown?
Yeah.
Huh.
To be,
R-O-W-N.
the great-grandfather did that when he became a sailor in the British Navy.
But he had an E at the end of it?
He had an E. My grandfather dropped the E off of it because he knew he was German, and he was going to be well, for whatever reason he dropped an E off of it. And when my great-grandfather must have been a character that any one of us would have liked to have met, because he was enterprising. And after he worked as a butcher in Wisconsin for some time, he was made aware of the fact that the stagecoach used to run between Milwaukee and Green Bay, Wisconsin. And there was a corner on this route that was about halfway between the two cities that the stage would overnight at, or try to stay there overnight. And the only bedrooms that would be available would be the farmhouses that were around there, which were not too numerous. Well, anyway, he decided to build a hotel on this corner, which later became known as Brown's Corners, which is right outside of Manitowoc. And they built this brick building, and my grandfather drove the team and horses that would haul the bricks from the brick factory to the site where they built this, and my grandfather inherited that.
Was Brown's Corners the name of the hotel?
Yeah.
Okay.
They didn't have a formal name for it, but it was an interesting building because it had two floors. The first floor had a tavern, a big parlor, a big dining room, and a reasonably big kitchen. And so when they stayed there overnight, I don't know how many people would be involved, maybe 5 or 6 when the stage didn't hold that many people. But they could have this facility. I think there were 4 bedrooms upstairs, big ones.
For the family?
No,
for the guests.
Oh, there were only 4?
Yeah, well, 5 or 6 people, that would all the stage would hold.
Okay.
So they accommodate what the stage would hold, that's all they needed. And the family had a bedroom downstairs.
How many floors was the building?
2.
Okay.
It was that one we saw in the picture on the other wall
Yeah.
in the beginning.
So your grandfather inherited that business then?
He did that, and he would tell of some experiences that he had running that so-called hotel.
Uh-huh.
Of course, after a while, when the railroads came in and the stage went out, then it just was a tavern. That's all it was when I knew it. And Grandpa was kind of a guy that he never let anybody drink too much when they were there. He chase them out if they were drinking too much.
Mm-hmm.
And he never would serve any liquor to any minor. Of course, women never came into the bar room. They always had to be in the parlor. So when I was a little kid and we would go out to visit Grandpa, I would sit with my mother in the parlor. And about 3 in the afternoon, he'd come around with a glass of wine for all the ladies, and he would have a little glass for me. And I thought I was getting the same thing they were, but it wasn't. It was probably a little wine with a lot of water in it.
Yeah. Huh.
So I was introduced to drinking in that manner. And of course, later on in life, when we had prohibition, which nobody could make or serve any liquor, a lot of people then, young people especially, would crave to have something, alcoholic beverage to drink, and we had what we call bootleggers who would supply that to the younger people. But I never had any inclination to drink because I could get, we had it at home. My father would serve wine at home on occasions, not every day, but on Sundays sometimes if we had company we would have wine.
This is during Prohibition?
Mm-hmm.
Wine was legal then?
Oh, no, not during Prohibition we didn't have it.
Okay.
Did they still own the tavern during Prohibition?
Yeah?
And so then did they have to go out of business, or?
No. They had no debt, so I don't know how they survived. I guess Grandfather had the business had been profitable, so he acquired a little money, because I know he used to loan money to people on occasion, to people he knew, not as a business. He tells a story about, in the wintertime, one winter, there was a community about 3 or 4 miles further west of him, which was settled by a bunch of Irish settlers. They were all farmers too. And on this one winter day, one of the Irish farmers took a load of grain on his sleigh with horses, pulled by horses, to Manitowoc, to the mill to get it, to sell it. And on his way back, while he was in Manitowoc, he'd had several drinks. On his way back, he stopped at Brown's Corners and decided he needed some more to drink. And he went into the tavern, and my grandma was tending bar, and Grandpa had gone to town also. And this Irishman got himself loaded pretty well, and he decided that he wanted another drink and Grandma wouldn't serve him. So he walks around the end of the bar and decided he was going to help himself. Well, as Grandpa told me, he said about that time the outside door opened up and the sheriff walked in from Manitowoc County. He saw what was going on and he took this guy and he threw him out of the saloon into the snowbank. And when this guy sobered up, this Irishman sobered up, he decided they can't do that to me, so he sued the sheriff. And the case came to court, and my grandfather went down to court to see how it was going to come out. And the judge asked a number of questions of this fellow, and one of the questions he asked was, how far did the sheriff throw you out of Brown's Tavern? And the guy must have answered about halfway across the road. And he said, well, if you don't know by now, it's time you found out that the sheriff of this county has a jurisdiction to throw a man all the way across the road. Case dismissed. That's what the only memory I have of something Grandfather told about what happened in the tavern. Of course, if he had walked behind the bar, he would have met something that he didn't expect from Grandma, because my grandfather had taken a piece of garden hose about this long, and he'd filled about half of it with birdshot, round pellets that would be loaded in a shotgun shell. And he sealed it off there, and this became sort of a billy club. And he said to her, if anybody comes behind the bar, you let them have it right across the neck here. And she would have done it, because she wasn't afraid of anything. Her grandma was a very aggressive person.
Describe their personalities to me.
Theirs?
Yeah.
Well, my grandfather was a pretty calm and collected sort of fellow. I never heard him raise his voice as long as I can remember. And he was kind. He always treated me very kindly. And Grandma was a very assertive person. He let her run the show at home, and she ran it pretty tight. And she treated me very nicely too. She would bake cake, and she baked two kinds of cake. It was either white or it was chocolate, and that's it. There was never any other kind of cake. I can recall that. And my mother used to bake a lot of different kinds of cake, and I said to Mother one time, why doesn't Grandma do that? And of course Mother said, that's her business. She bakes what she wants.
What were your parents like?
Well, my father was a very kind person too. He was sort of a no-nonsense guy. I learned very early in life that you didn't lie to him. If he ever caught you in a lie, you'd suffer for it. What they used to make me do was, when I violated any of their rules, they would sometimes spank me if it was a serious violation. Not too hard, but then the hardest part was they'd make me sit in the corner, facing the corner, on a chair, until I was ready to say I was sorry for what I had done. That was the hardest part. But probably the most influential part of the punishment, because I always remembered that.
What was your mom like?
Mom, well, you knew Grandma a little bit, didn't you?
Yep.
Sure did.
She was not a well-educated person, but she had a lot of common sense. And she had been a clerk in a store, in a department store in Manitowoc, until she married.
I remember her telling me she used to make $1.25 a week.
Wow.
Yeah, I meant to interject before that when I was going with Grandma before we were married, we would drive, my mother and father and Alice and I would drive to Green Bay in Dad's car, and we'd have dinner there at a restaurant called Cops. And the dinner that we would have would consist of soup and salad, an entree, and a dessert. Because I can remember the menu, I can remember seeing it all on the menu. And that would cost $1.25 for the dinner. So 4 of us would go to dinner, it cost my dad $5.
And I used to think, oh my gosh.
Well, that was a lot of money
$5.
probably then.
They didn't do that
I never ate in
So
a
what was your
restaurant
mom's-
until I met you.
What was your mom's personality like though?
Well, she was,
Kind of hard to say.
she was, in her family, see, Aunt Edna used to tell me things that Mother was kind of a domineering person.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, when she got old, she wasn't, but there was always friction between my Aunt Edna and Mother.
Mm-hmm.
They'd get irritated with each other. And that lasted as long as they lived. I can remember one time when Edna came out here to California to visit, and she stayed with my mother. I got a phone call from Mother one day, and she was crying on the phone, would I come over there? So I went over there, and it was absurd. I mean, they'd gotten into a tither about nothing,
Mm-hmm.
really nothing. And I accused them of being children. I can remember doing that. And I said, the Lord has taught us to love one another, and you're a pretty good example of that right now. And that kind of took the edge off of it.
But Edna always was around our family.
Yeah, she was a loving person.
I remember, one thing I remember about her that was kind of special for me as a kid growing up, her Christmas presents were always pretty special.
She was a generous person.
I mean, we didn't have all that much money, I guess, as we were growing up, but come Christmas time, she would always...
She would splurge at Christmas, yeah.
She must have liked you especially, because...
Well, she lived with them for so many years.
Yeah, she lived with us for years until we moved from 8th Street, the house on 8th Street, the big house, to 17th Street.
And Erle and I had come back from Indiana at that point. I mean, we were living with his folks. So when they had to move into this newer house, it didn't have as much room, or much bedrooms. Well, anyhow...
Well, the room on the 17th Street house is the one I remember, right?
Had 2 big bedrooms upstairs.
Yeah.
But anyhow, Earl's dad told Edna that she would have to find another place now, because Erle and I were going to live with them. And that hurt her. I don't know if she was ever mad at us for that.
No, she knew that was going to happen, but it was how he told her, I guess, that really,
Yeah.
Did your parents get along well?
yeah.
Don't ask me that.
Okay. Well, you can be honest. I mean, we're not trying to paint a pretty picture if it
No.
wasn't, but...
My dad and mother quarreled all the time.
Did you guys, did your families have a sense of humor, or
Oh, yeah,
your fun times?
sure. most of our relatives were farmers, and we would visit them a number of times during the year. And they would have their good times. And the farmer kids gave me my best education. I got all my sex education from the farmer kids. They would talk about the cows being born, which a city kid never had any
exposure to that.
Yeah, nobody ever told us either.
Yeah.
How about you, Mom? What was your mother like?
That was the wrong question to ask.
No, we want to know.
Well, she was domineering. She and my dad quarreled all the time. I used to feel so sorry for him. And I don't know.
She was just hard to live with?
My dad was more easygoing, and he'd invest money, and he'd lose it, and that would make my mother
upset.
And of course, anything that ever happened, we heard. Every time something else went wrong, we'd hear about everything that
Prior to
happened
that.
before.
Yeah.
And this went on for years and years and years. And my mother and dad quarreled all the time. I can remember as a kid, hearing them.
So that was a pretty painful memory.
Yeah. And my dad was a nice guy. Everybody liked him.
Tell us about him.
Well, my dad was lame for one thing. He had one leg shorter than the other. And they didn't know in those days, they thought he had infantile paralysis as a child. They didn't know about those things then. And he was a depot agent.
Working for the railroad?
He was head of the depot in Two Rivers.
Two Rivers was at the end of the line.
Do you have any pleasant memories of you and your brothers when you were little kids?
I can remember one, well, yeah, John and I got along always pretty good. Carl was older, not so much, but he just was older and away from home more, I can remember once John, we do this several times, we take a string and rope off a corner of the room and we box. Put mittens on
Really?
And we box. And of course, I always got the worst of it. And then we have a clock there that would give the alarm, and it was kind of fun.
You made a ring.
Yeah.
Boxing ring.
Yeah. We do that often.
Do you remember ever having a fun time with some kind of a civic activity, like a parade or...
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. On Decoration Day, Memorial Day, which is coming up, all the school kids marched in the parade, and we went to the cemetery. And of course, that was boring when you got to the cemetery because they always had speeches, and the kids would be running around. But you go with your flag, carry a flag, and march to the cemetery.
Did your family go to church when you were a kid?
My mother was Catholic, my father was Lutheran, consequently there was not much religion, although my dad did go to church alone. As I remember when I was young, but later on we went to a congregational church. That's where I grew up. We 3 kids grew up in that church, went to Sunday school every Sunday. My dad would go to church alone. My mother went once in a great while.
Did you like going to church? Or do you remember?
Yeah, I sang in a choir. Went to Sunday school every Sunday. I liked it.
How about you, Grandpa? Did you guys?
Well, when I was in high school, I played the violin. And I was in the high school orchestra. And I also was stage manager of our stage in my junior and senior year. So on one occasion, the director of the band and the director of the orchestra, one and the same fellow. At one time during that time, the bass drummer of the band, father died, and he had to leave school and go to work. His father run a service station. So they didn't have a bass drummer, and this was toward the end of the year, the school year, probably in April sometime when this happened. And when the band practiced, I had a free period, so I used to go down to the stage and do whatever I wanted to do there, to repair something or something. So I'm sitting there one day, and the band director said, "You go and beat the bass drum for us." So I became the bass drummer. And there were two functions we played for. One was a tournament at the end of the school year, a band tournament among high schools in the state. And the other was the Decoration Day or Memorial Day as we know it now. The high school band would play in the parade.
Mm-hmm.
So we went to the band tournament, and when we came back from the tournament on our first practice session, we'd gotten something like third place or fourth place, something like that. This very diplomatic band director we had indicated that if it wasn't for the drum section, we'd have been a lot higher in our... So who were they talking about? That was me, because the other drummers were, the snare drummers were experienced people. Well, the gal that was played the first cornet in the band, she was in addition to me, she was very offended by that remark. So, and so was I. I just put my, what do you call it, baton down,
Stick,
drumstick down, and I walked off the stage, off the band practice. Well, we still had the Decoration Day parade to play, and after a couple of days, the band director met me in the hall, and I think it was planned that he wanted to see me, and he asked me if I wouldn't play in the parade, and I said, sure, I'll do that. In the meantime, this gal who was playing first cornet found out that I was going to play again, and she said, we'll have some fun on the parade. And I said, what do you have in mind? She said, well, the parade started on the south side of town, and it went across the bridge, across the river, which was the low point in town. And when we once crossed the river, we had to go up a hill, which is about 3 blocks long. And she said to me, when we get to the bottom of that hill and we start marching up there, I want you to pick up the cadence, and we'll walk a little faster. Mm-hmm. Well, the director was a little short guy, and he marched with the band. So we had a group of Boy Scouts following us, and when we got down to the foot of the hill, I started picking up the cadence. And of course, the bass drummer can do that. Uh-huh. And everybody else in the band but him knew that this was going to happen, so they went along, played accordingly. We got to the top of the hill, and this guy was just as red as a beet. He could hardly breathe anymore, and the Boy Scouts were half a block behind us. They couldn't keep up. So when we marched into the cemetery, you muffle the drums, and you went at half cadence, and out of respect for the dead, that was what we were told anyway. Yeah. And then you dispersed. Well, when we dispersed, I and several other kids in the band were standing there talking together to each other, and the director came up to us, our group, and I thought, now I'm going to really catch it. And he came up and he looked at me right square in the eye, and I looked at him, and he was again, just as red as a beet, and perspiring. And finally, I never could figure out until later what was going through his mind, but he turned around and walked away. And what was going through his mind, I'm sure, is what's the use?
Yeah.
I mean, talking about it now. But that's one of the things I remember about playing in the band.
Did your family go to church when you were a kid?
Yes. My,
Yeah, that's when my religion really started, is when I met Erle.
when we went to church, every Sunday, I went to Sunday school every Sunday.
Was it Lutheran
that
church?
was routine. I mean, that was part of life.
Everybody went?
Everybody went.
Was it Lutheran church?
And when I went to church, Lutheran church, the first thing, one of the things I can remember is that when we went to communion on Communion Sunday, the women all sat on the left side of the church aisle, and the men all on the right side. And the men went first, and then the women went. This is getting back to the old German ways of doing things, and you never changed that. You never crossed these old hard-headed Germans. You never crossed them too much.
But it was only on Communion Sunday.
That's right.
Where the kids sit?
But good question.
Probably with the mother, huh?
Probably with the mothers.
I think so. I can't recall. Wait a minute. More often, we were in Sunday school when they were having church.
Okay.
But as we got older, we went to church with them.
Did you guys have church picnics or anything like that?
Yeah, and we had beer at the church picnic.
Yeah.
And we had a good time. We had, we would call them barbecue stands now, but they made bratwurst and hamburgers, and we had a lot of good food.
Yeah, I can remember as a kid, the church picnic was one of the highlights of the year for the kids anyhow, or for me anyhow. We'd have a church, we'd have an old pump organ that they would have a church service out in the park. And the park had these building that was set up with at each one of the four corners was a different little store-like thing where it had a counter, and in one of them they had cook oven or place to barbecue the hamburgers and the bratwurst, and one of them they would serve pop out of, and one of them they would
Ice cream.
ice cream out of one of them, and you'd get tickets. And you'd always have to run back to Mom and Dad or Grandpa and Grandma and ask them if they had any extra tickets.
How big was the congregation?
Well, I really don't know. I would say 300-400 if they all got there at one time. My father was on a building committee that built the new church. We only had, when I was a kid, we only had one church in town, a Lutheran church. Wisconsin Synod Church. And then they built one on the north, that was on the south side. They built one on the north side, and that was when my father was on the building committee.
I joined in the church after we were married.
Yeah, you went
I
to...
was
you went to
pregnant
instruction?
with you.
With who?
Roger.
With Brownie. That ain't Brownie.
That's okay. With Brownie or with Roger?
No, with you.
Well, I'm your grandson, so couldn't have been.
Well, we had moved out in
She means me.
Wisconsin.
Oh, okay.
Roger was born already,
Well, sure.
and I joined your Lutheran church.
And you were pregnant with
With-
Brownie.
With Brownie, yeah, that's what I said, isn't it?
No, well, you said you were pointing the
I
mic.
pointed him, but I said Brownie.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, let's